I mean, there we are. I mean, there's really no guessing here. I don't know why we keep doing stupidity of this nature, because all we're doing Ukraine has lost this war. No amount of weaponry can change that outcome. The collapse in the Donetsk front is real. It's happening. The Russians are just advancing. I mean, you had to, don't take my word for it, take the word of, I think he's commander of the 54th or 57th Brigade in the Ukrainian army, says we're losing 7 miles a day. We're just withdrawing 7 miles a day, every day, going backwards and backwards and backwards. We got nothing left to stand up. We don't have any infantry. We're out of artillery. We're out of tanks. We have nothing. So they're falling back. The Kursk salient is collapsing.
Greetings, viewers. Recent developments on the Russian-Ukrainian border have taken a significant turn, pointing to an intensifying conflict and deeper involvement of foreign actors. On October 28th, Russian forces, as reported by Mr. Scott Ritter, successfully neutralized a group of foreign combatants attempting to breach the Russian border in the Bryansk region. The operation revealed the direct involvement of highly trained fighters from the United States Elite 75th Ranger Regiment. Known for its specialized combat operations, this unit represents the tip of the spear in U.S. military strategy tasked with carrying out rapid, high-risk missions around the world. Their engagement in this conflict, albeit unofficially, underscores a dangerous escalation that brings the conflict ever closer to direct confrontation between Russia and NATO forces. The Rangers are renowned for their operational efficiency, trained in everything from sabotage and reconnaissance to direct action missions deep behind enemy lines. That such a sophisticated force was deployed on the Bryansk border suggests a far greater ambition than just testing Russian defenses. It aligns with a broader strategy to stretch Russian military resources thin by opening multiple fronts. The incident also reflects a shift in the dynamics of the war, where even elite Western units are now being drawn into the fray, operating under the cover of deniable missions. The involvement of such a unit raises several key questions. Was this an isolated attempt, or part of a broader NATO-aligned strategy to escalate tensions on Russian soil? How does this alter the geopolitical landscape, and what message does it send to Moscow? The situation demands close attention as Russia continues to respond decisively to incursions along its borders, and Ukraine, backed by Western allies, pursues increasingly desperate measures to shift the momentum of the conflict. But how did this audacious incursion come to be, and what does it signify in the broader context of the conflict? Let's delve deeper. According to Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, the attempted breach into the Bryansk region on October 28th was no ordinary skirmish, but a meticulously coordinated infiltration. The mission involved approximately 30 well-equipped combatants, including members of the U.S. 75th Ranger Regiment, alongside mercenaries from Sweden, Poland, Venezuela, and the U.K. This diverse group of operatives, each contributing specialized skills, highlights the extent of international involvement in the conflict, a reflection of NATO's indirect engagement. Equipped with advanced communication devices and foreign manufactured weapons, these combatants were prepared for sustained operations beyond the border. However, Russia's intelligence capabilities ensured that their efforts were thwarted before they could achieve their objective. Reports from the FSB revealed that the infiltrators intended to enter the Bryansk region covertly, using the dense forest and rugged terrain to evade detection. Their ultimate goal likely involved sabotage or reconnaissance, intended to disrupt Russian defenses and create vulnerabilities along the border. The selection of Bryansk as their point of entry also reflects a strategic gamble. Its proximity to both Belarus and the Sumy region of Ukraine makes it a critical area for cross-border operations. This operation showcases the evolving tactics employed by Ukraine and its allies, aiming to draw Russian forces into multiple engagements simultaneously. By spreading Russian troops thin across several fronts, Kyiv hopes to create openings in Moscow's defenses. However, the swiftness with which the incursion was neutralized reveals that Russia's counterintelligence measures remain sharp, and its forces prepared to respond decisively to any threats along its borders. The presence of mercenaries from multiple nations adds another layer of complexity. These fighters, many of whom operate outside conventional military structures, play a key role in asymmetric warfare. Their deployment in this mission demonstrates the growing reliance on irregular forces by Ukraine and its Western backers, a strategy that aims to circumvent conventional military limitations while escalating the conflict without official NATO involvement. This bold move raises questions about the escalating involvement of foreign entities in the Ukrainian conflict. General Oleksandr Syrsky, Ukraine's commander-in-chief, has been navigating through a shrinking list of strategic options as the tide continues to turn against Ukrainian forces. In the past months, Syrsky mulled over multiple strategies to regain momentum, either focusing on Kursk, Bryansk, or launching simultaneous assaults along both fronts. These strategies weren't arbitrary, each aimed to break Russian defensive lines and force Moscow to divert resources from other critical areas. However, after Kursk turned into a battlefield quagmire, with Ukrainian troops suffering heavy losses and facing relentless Russian counteroffensives, Kyiv's attention shifted toward Bryansk. The reasoning was clear: Bryansk's location near Belarus, coupled with its proximity to the Ukrainian border, offers a potential weak point, at least on paper. By pushing into Bryansk, Ukraine hopes to gain leverage, possibly forcing Russia to shift forces away from more vital fronts, such as Donbass or Zaporizhzhia. Reports indicate that Ukrainian forces have been amassing near the northern town of Trinadev, which lies strategically close to the Russian border. The buildup includes a mixture of regular units, foreign mercenaries, and tactical groups designed for rapid incursions. This movement suggests Kyiv is not merely posturing but preparing for a high-stakes maneuver to shift the dynamics of the conflict. Military analysts, including Inspector Scott Ritter, have weighed in on this shift in strategy. According to Ritter, such maneuvers reflect Kyiv's growing desperation to score a symbolic or tangible victory as both time and resources dwindle. With international support increasingly uncertain, Ukraine finds itself under pressure to deliver military successes, not only to maintain Western aid, but also to shore up domestic morale in the face of mounting losses. However, the challenge is steep. Russia's defenses in Bryansk have been reinforced following earlier incursions, and any further attempt to breach the border will likely meet a swift and formidable response. Even so, the stakes are incredibly high for Kyiv, and the shifting focus to Bryansk signals just how narrow their operational options have become. But with such high-risk maneuvers, the stakes have never been higher. In a noteworthy development, Kyiv's increasing reliance on foreign mercenaries has become more apparent. Recognizing the limitations of its own military manpower, Ukraine recently passed legislation permitting foreign fighters to serve as active duty officers in its military. This move not only reflects the need to supplement dwindling Ukrainian forces, but also introduces a tactical shift by incorporating mercenaries experienced in modern asymmetric warfare. Military analyst Colonel Viktor Litovkin interprets this strategy as an effort to mask the true extent of international involvement in the conflict. Mercenaries, often operating outside conventional military structures, bring critical expertise and flexibility, making them valuable in missions that require quick deployment and precision. These fighters also come with extensive experience in handling advanced Western-supplied weapons, such as Patriot missile systems, HIMARS rocket launchers, and the elusive F-16 fighter jets. Inspector Scott Ritter has similarly warned that this integration of foreign elements further complicates the conflict. Ritter argues that the use of mercenaries blurs the lines of accountability, potentially dragging more nations intentionally or not into the fray. The reliance on these fighters indicates that Kyiv is increasingly operating on borrowed time, both in terms of manpower and strategic options. However, this reliance comes with significant risks. Mercenaries often lack the same loyalty and long-term commitment as regular troops, and their motivations are typically financial rather than ideological. This creates a volatile situation where operational cohesion can easily be compromised, especially in high-pressure scenarios. Moreover, the presence of mercenaries from multiple countries introduces a fragmented command structure, complicating coordination and potentially leading to operational failures. However, this strategy has its pitfalls. Despite the influx of sophisticated Western weaponry, Ukraine faces critical challenges in utilizing this military aid effectively. The operation and maintenance of complex systems like the F-16 fighter jets require more than just a handful of pilots. It demands a well-trained infrastructure of support personnel. Each fighter jet needs regular maintenance from technicians fluent in military-grade English and familiar with U.S. military protocols, which poses a significant problem for Ukraine. Inspector Scott Ritter highlights this logistical bottleneck, noting that Ukraine lacks the depth of expertise required to operate these systems independently. Ukrainian personnel have limited experience with such high-end equipment, and attempts to train local technicians have been hindered by time constraints and resource limitations. While Ukraine has requested NATO assistance, these requests have been denied as Western nations remain wary of being drawn directly into the conflict and potentially provoking Russian retaliation. Additionally, without Western experts on the ground, even the most advanced equipment becomes a liability. The F-16, for example, requires meticulous upkeep, and its combat readiness diminishes rapidly without proper maintenance. This has prevented Ukraine from deploying the jets effectively, and it remains unclear when or if these aircraft will become a factor in the battlefield. Ritter points out that these logistical challenges reveal a deeper vulnerability within Ukraine's war efforts. While the arrival of Western weapons creates headlines, the reality on the ground is far more complicated. Without the necessary expertise to maintain and operate these systems, Ukraine risks turning cutting-edge technology into little more than expensive paperweights. This situation raises troubling questions about the long-term viability of Kyiv's reliance on foreign aid. This shortage of expertise underscores a critical vulnerability in Kyiv's war efforts. As the US presidential elections approach, Kyiv finds itself in a precarious position, the clock is ticking, and the outcome of the election could drastically alter the level of support Ukraine receives from its Western allies. Desperate for a military success to maintain momentum and secure ongoing financial and military aid, Kyiv has ramped up efforts to score a significant battlefield victory. However, its traditional targets, Crimea and Zaporizhzhia, remain far beyond reach, shielded by Russia's robust defenses and cutting-edge electronic warfare capabilities. Crimea, in particular, stands as a symbol of Russian dominance, fortified to an unprecedented degree. Russian military assets, including surface-to-air missile systems and electronic jamming equipment, have transformed the peninsula into a virtual fortress. Repeated Ukrainian attempts to penetrate these defenses with advanced UAVs, unmanned surface vehicles (USVS), and Western-supplied missiles have met with limited success. Russia's ability to intercept and neutralize these attacks underscores just how impenetrable these strongholds have become. Meanwhile, Zaporizhzhia, with its critical nuclear power plant, remains another high-value target. Yet any significant action here is fraught with danger not only for Ukraine but for Europe as a whole. The specter of a nuclear incident has deterred even Kyiv's Western backers from endorsing a full-scale push in the region. Without these strategic victories, Ukraine finds itself increasingly reliant on smaller, high-risk operations along the border regions to create leverage operations that have so far yielded little more than symbolic gestures. Inspector Scott Ritter points out that Kyiv's calculations are shaped not just by battlefield realities, but also by the political landscape in Washington. With U.S. elections looming, Kyiv understands that time is running out. A shift in American leadership could result in reduced military aid or a pivot towards a negotiated settlement, forcing Ukraine to act quickly to solidify its position before the geopolitical winds change. Kyiv's strategic calculus, however, comes with the significant risks. By opening new fronts and pushing for high-stakes operations with dwindling resources, Ukraine risks overextending its military and inviting further setbacks. The question remains, will these desperate maneuvers pay off? Or are they destined to become another chapter in a series of failed offensives? So, is opening new fronts the answer, or a futile gesture? On the ground, Russia's military posture has evolved significantly, making any Ukrainian breakthrough increasingly unlikely. The failure of recent operations, including the attempted incursion into Bryansk, highlights the difficulties Ukraine faces in mounting successful offensives against well-prepared Russian defenses. With every unsuccessful operation, Ukraine finds itself not only losing ground, but also expending valuable manpower and resources that cannot be easily replaced. Russia has learned from past incursions, strengthening its border defenses and positioning significant troop contingents along critical entry points. Fortifications have been bolstered with layered defensive systems, including mines, anti-tank barriers, and electronic jamming capabilities that neutralize UAV reconnaissance efforts. This robust defensive infrastructure is designed not just to repel attacks, but to prevent surprise incursions entirely. Additionally, Russia's troop presence along the border has grown, with reinforcements strategically deployed to ensure rapid response capability. Inspector Scott Ritter notes that this buildup serves as a deterrent to further Ukrainian provocations, signaling that any attempt to breach Russian territory will be met with overwhelming force. The sheer scale of these defenses makes it clear that Russia is prepared for a prolonged conflict, confident in its ability to outlast Ukraine's offensive efforts. For Ukraine, the reality is grim. Surprise attacks, once a key part of its strategy, are now nearly impossible to execute. The high-risk maneuvers that Kyiv continues to rely on are yielding diminishing returns, with each failed attempt contributing to a growing sense of frustration within its ranks. Meanwhile, Russian forces remain entrenched and unyielding, steadily regaining territory lost in earlier phases of the conflict. This dynamic leaves Ukraine in a precarious position, fighting not only against a formidable adversary, but also against time. As Western support begins to wane and resources grow scarce, Kyiv must weigh the costs of continued offensives against the likelihood of further strategic setbacks. The question becomes not just how long Ukraine can sustain its efforts, but whether it can achieve any meaningful success before its options run out. All these factors paint a grim picture for Ukraine's current strategies. In the broader context of the conflict, Kyiv's relentless offensives, bolstered by foreign mercenaries and Western-supplied weapons, have produced limited results at a steep cost. Ukraine's strategy, built on the hope of rapid breakthroughs and symbolic victories, has instead yielded mounting casualties and strategic setbacks. The reliance on external support, both in terms of manpower and material, exposes a critical weakness. Without continuous Western aid, Ukraine's ability to sustain its war efforts diminishes rapidly. Inspector Scott Ritter has emphasized that the sustainability of Kyiv's approach is now under serious question. With Russia firmly entrenched on multiple fronts and Western patience beginning to wear thin, the path forward for Ukraine appears increasingly uncertain. Every failed offensive chips away at the narrative of impending victory that Kyiv has tried to project, making it harder to justify the continued sacrifices to its own population and to its foreign backers. As Russia remains steadfast, leveraging its defensive advantage and strategic depth, the momentum appears to be shifting decisively in Moscow's favor. Even as Ukrainian forces attempt to regroup and launch new operations, the cumulative impact of repeated losses is becoming undeniable. With U.S. elections just around the corner, Kyiv faces the real possibility that Western support could diminish, forcing it into a position where negotiated settlements become the only viable path forward. Ultimately, the conflict has entered a phase where grand offensives are increasingly proving to be futile gestures rather than game changers. The battlefield realities combined with shifting geopolitical dynamics suggest that Ukraine's gambles may only lead to further losses and dwindling options. Echoing the insights of Inspector Scott Ritter, it is evident that without a significant shift in strategy, Ukraine risks being left with little more than broken plans and exhausted resources. And so as the conflict drags on and options narrow, the question remains, how much longer can Ukraine sustain this war of attrition? Thank you for joining us in this analysis. Stay tuned for more in-depth coverage of the developments on the Eastern Front. Until next time.